Bookseller Crow on the box. Tales from an empty bookshelf.
Action!
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next Bookseller Crow on the box, where we have this week the wonderful Jenny Landreth with us. She was with us, about 3 years ago when you came to celebrate Swell.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago, yes.
Yeah. And Jenny is a script editor for Hey Dougie, and also a writer who you've written for all sorts of publications. And that sounds a bit vague.
Nicely vague. Let's just kind of cover all bases.
And the main contributor to The Guardian's swimming blog.
Yes, I used to write a lot about swimming, so I've definitely stepped out of the water onto dry land.
Fantastic. And yes, Swell, the water biography, was a massive hit here, and it was actually Sunday Times Sports Book of the Year.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to hear about the history of female swimmers, and also your relation to the Lido in Brockwell, and that community opened my eyes. Still haven't been.
Yeah.
I like to keep my clothes on. Anyway, but Jenny comes from a family of devoted am-dram fanatics.
Yes.
And this is your new book, Break a Leg.
Yes.
Hold on, the big reveal.
So we do have something theatrical planned. Curtain up.
Other way.
Whoa. Good. That is it. So yes, a memoir, manifesto and celebration of amateur theatre. And would you like to introduce this book in your own words?
Yes. Well, it is pretty much what it says on the cover. It's a variety of strands all brought together to tell the story of amateur theatre right from the get-go. Because right at the start, all theatre was amateur, and it was professional theatre that started long after amateur theatre had already been going. So there's a historical strand. There's a memoir strand which talks about how my parents met at a very specific theatre in Sutton Coldfield in Birmingham, and it's my own story, of my own dramatic story, and I followed a production from beginning to end as the kind of spine of the book. And so I went back to the theatre where I'd grown up, Hybrid Little Theatre in Sutton Coldfield, and followed a production there from first rehearsal to last night to see how that went.
Yes, it's a wonderful book, Jenny. Would you like to start off the proceedings then by giving us a short reading?
Yes, I'm gonna start at the beginning. That seems appropriate. Okay, so the story starts in 1955, which is 6 years before I was born. Shall I read to you or to the camera in my most amateur dramatic style?
I think everyone.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll just read it. I'll just read
The world to your stage.
In 1955, my mum, Hazel Nicholson, was living with her parents in King's Standing, Birmingham, and had recently graduated in English Lit from Manchester University. She was a keen participant in the arts. She went to plays, films and concerts several times a week, hopping buses all over the place, the 33 or the 107 from Beggar's Bush. She went to the Pavilion in Boldmere, the Scala in Stockland Green, the Empress in Sutton and the Gaumont in town, to the Arena Theatre in Cannon Hill, the Old Rep and Stratford. She saw everything, modern, classics, Shakespeare, and things that sound truly terrible, with titles like The Noble Spaniard and Demetrius the Gladiator and The Silver Curlew. I know these titles, where she saw them and with whom, because she kept a diary and wrote 2-line reviews of everything. My mum did not sit on the fence. Monday 14th of February 1955. Saw 3 coins in a fountain. Beautiful scenery. Story puerile. Thursday 5th of May 1955. Stratford, 12th night. Lawrence, Olivier, as Malvolio. Delightful. Heavy nasal tones. Viola, Vivian Lee, adequate. Poetic moments rather false. wonderful evening. I mean, as a break off here, I'm not sure how wonderful evening came from Vivian Lee being adequate and the poetic moments being false, but there you go. Wednesday, 5th of October 1955. Flicks to see Not as a Stranger. R. Mitchum somehow good in spite of expressionless face. I was enjoying her reviews. Here was confirmation, if needed, that the apple does not fall far from the tree. But one entry really stood out. 9th of June 1955. Play went quite well. Bit slow. Birmingham Post there. Played Cat's Cradle with Philip! Exclamation mark. There's a lot in that sentence that's revealing, not least the final innocent exclamation mark. You can see from her diary entries that my mother kept her powder very, very dry. She didn't scatter her punctuation or her feelings with abandon. They were both rationed. That's not surprising, given that rationing itself had only ended in Britain the year before. People were used to keeping any kind of hunger buttoned down. For my mum to have given something or someone the extravagant flourish of an exclamation mark could only mean that it, or he, had significance. Hindsight also helps. In a parallel universe to the one in which Rebel Without a Cause was heating other young people to a frenzy, my mother was getting her kicks playing Cat's Cradle with Philip. From our modern perspective, you have to work quite hard to understand this, to get a sense of the frisson Cat's Cradle might have caused between two consenting adults. Is that what counted for fun in the Midlands in the 1950s? Because it doesn't exactly reek of allure, tangling wool round your fingers and hoping it will be seductive. But maybe that's cynical. Maybe it is actually thrilling to meet someone's eyes over a string pattern, to slide your fingers in under the other person's, make the string taut, then slip it from one to the other, accidentally touching skin as you go. It certainly worked here. Philip was the dentist Mum would marry 2 years later, my dad. In 1955, my mum and dad met as members of an amateur theatre company, Highbury Little Theatre, on the outskirts of Birmingham, between Erdington and its slightly posher neighbour, Sutton Coldfield. The Cat's Cradle was happening in the green room, where the cast hung out when they weren't required on stage. The Voysey Inheritance, I think it was, the first play I started to know him, my mum said. I played his wife, and I died in childbirth, so that was nice. Mum had joined Highbury in 1954 and is still a member in 2020. That makes 66 years and counting in the same company, working in every possible capacity, from lead roles to making tea and everything in between. All that drama, all her life, and to this day you will never find her flinging around an unnecessary bit of punctuation.
Oh, well done.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Yes, I think you're going to... shall we just start with the word amateur?
Yes.
Because...
Well, it's a contentious term, isn't it?
Well, it is a contentious term, and actually just this week I've had people saying that I shouldn't use the term am-dram because people in the amateur world, this tweeter confidently told me, find it demeaning. And of course, all the people I spoke to in am-dram, well, some of the people I spoke to in am-dram found it demeaning, other people don't. And my view is that if you can't call yourself what it is, then you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing. So I think it's quite important to say clearly, yes, we are amateur. We should celebrate that fact and acknowledge it gleefully.
Absolutely. And as your book points out, that, you know, once upon a time, to be amateur was actually what people wanted to be. They paid in Dickens's time.
Yes.
To act in plays.
Yeah.
They prefer the status. So recently, and you make that point about popular taste being educated out of us, and therefore somehow the connotation of amateur has become a bit
second rate.
And it isn't. I mean, one of the things that amazes me most of all is how professional everybody is in am-dram.
Well, I think the thing people come to it with a huge set of preconceptions, that it's really naff, it's really second rate, it's one particular kind of theatre. But actually, the thing that I found really easily was that there's all sorts of different kinds of amateur theatre going on in all sorts of different places. It's not just this one very narrow thing of dusty sets falling over, plays from the 1950s being repeated with people in dusty wigs and being, it's just not that one thing. There are places where, yes, that happens. But I think even that has a value. But people are terribly snobbish about it, and I think sometimes people in the amateur community struggle with it because of that. I had cross words with people who'd say, I'm not an amateur, I'm non-professional.
I'm not unpaid.
I'm unpaid. Or community theatre, people like the term community theatre, but that to me doesn't really reflect what it truly is. I think take the word, claim it, and make it.
And as you memorably say, you don't want to be amateur-splained.
Yeah.
Don't tell me, I know.
Yeah.
This book is really about opening up that world. And for me, who works in performance and gay cabaret venues, I knew very little about amateur dramatics. And then, of course, as you start thinking about it, of course, it's everywhere. And that's what, what I suddenly realised when I used to work at British Airways. They used to have the yearly big production of the Panto, which was a high production, I think semi-professional people thought of it.
I think they still do that at BA.
Yeah, they
wow.
do. And it was a big, and I never got to see it, stupidly, because I was always away. But
always up in the air.
Somewhere else. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about these sort of various groups? You went to Germany within the book, and I
went to Brussels. Yeah, well,
yes,
I went to Antwerp. Yeah,
Antwerp.
I mean, that's a really interesting world. Before I started writing the book, I thought that's really weird. Why would there be a community of groups around Europe doing amateur theatre, always in English? And I assumed they were all expats who were kind of trying to recreate something of their homeland. And there are people who are expats doing that, people either working temporarily or permanently in other cities around Europe, English speaking. But there are also a huge amount of people who just love theatre, who don't have other opportunities, who might be German speaking, then doing plays in essentially their second language, often quite complex pieces of work. So there's a whole network of groups over in Europe kind of keeping on those traditions. And when I went to the festival, actually, that some of the work was really radical. It's not just, again, I'm repeating myself, but it's not just a very narrow set of productions that people choose to do. They do really radical plays that aren't necessarily getting their second productions in the UK because they might be, too radical, or somebody like Sarah Kane, for instance, doesn't get massively produced over here, but she does get produced still on the amateur circuit because it's for a more a younger set of performers, that's really interesting and challenging work. They don't want to just keep repeating the same work. So it's really weird, the fact that there's this whole other scene going on across Europe.
And then there is the code. The code.
Yeah, there is a code.
Which brings us all out.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, having been in am-dram myself in my teens, straight away, it's so recognisable that somebody when you meet somebody, and all you have to do is, begin the conversation, and before you know it, they've been involved at some level somewhere. Yeah. Well, you can tell, really, can't you?
Slightly.
There are those that drink tea and those that don't.
Yeah.
and it's the same. When I was in am-dram, you saying you went to Antwerp for the competition, the FEATS.
Yes.
Yes, I was in production that won the regional.
The
Southeast Regional
of
Oh, What a Lovely War.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me forever.
Yeah.
And it does. It would go on my CV if I was allowed to put it on there. But no, I'm very interested. I love that the fact that you've pinpointed that especially in the UK, but yes, elsewhere, the English speaking people that perform English speaking plays because they do it for fun and not
Yeah.
because they're paid.
Just do it for
Because
love.
they
Yeah.
just feel, you
Yeah.
know, that
And
they want to.
and most of them feel. I think a couple of people probably would have liked to have had professional careers, and that hasn't happened for them. I mean, my mum still would quite, you know, aged 88, would quite like to have a professional career, but most of them feel that they're in a better position being amateurs, because they get the roles they want. They get a much wider choice of roles than they would normally otherwise get, and nobody can push them around. They don't have to be bullied by directors.
Well, as you say, it's the dream of performing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's the joy, and joy features a lot.
Yes, that's the word. The complete, and actually without prompting, you know, you kind of think as a writer, oh, that's nice that people are repeating these little motifs, but people would do it completely spontaneously and think, oh, okay, this is slightly getting. Have you all got together behind my back and decided to consistently use this word? But it kept cropping up, and there's so few things in life that you can say that about. And it was a very diverse group of people all using the same word over and over again. It was great.
And they just, the quality, I mean, will not hear. I mean, when they talk about, you know, dusty sets falling down and, you know, dusty church halls and everything, I recall being so impressed by performance standards.
Yeah.
You can't believe that these people are not on the telly because they are so. But not only the actors, who are all fabulous, or in the main fabulous, and then the ones that aren't, well, you know, doesn't really. But also the technicians and the costume and the workmanship that goes into putting those things together.
And the knowledge that people have about how to do a lighting rig, how to do a soundboard, how to operate all of that stuff, how to stage manage a show, how to produce a show, all of that knowledge just swilling around in an amateur community.
As well as holding down a normal job elsewhere and doing a 9 to 5 or whatever it is, or not doing a 9 to 5, being, you know, a medic or a doctor or a dentist or whatever, and yet still after work. Coming on and doing this.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
I mean, it begins, doesn't it, with you, with your father, and he's smoking in the
in the box.
You know, and it's really, you know, as well as it charting the history of am-dram, if I can use that term, but also a kind of journey. Journey is always a bit of a naff word, isn't it? But it was something about you going through and arriving back at a different, you know, point, but in the same sort of lighting box. And the memoir strand of this is also really beautifully written, and I think to do with your mother as well, who was or is a costume.
She works in the costume now.
Yes,
because that seems to be a bit where the elderly ladies get slightly shunted into. But she, you know, she's good at that. You know, they all meet, or they did meet until obviously circumstances changed every Wednesday morning to organise the costume department.
And there's you were saying earlier about a beautiful bit of description where your mum, you described her size and how she could easily have sort of fallen into this.
A hamper full of ruffles. And I can picture the hamper full of ruffles and your mum somewhere at the bottom of it.
But that's it, and it's so tender, really, those strands that you weave in of the stuff about your mum and your dad. But I felt the book was a fine balancing act between having all these different elements to it. But you have written at the back, it is for your mum. So, like, you've dedicated it to your mum.
Yeah.
But those moments, how did you manage to balance it out while you were writing it? Did you feel that you could almost have gone off into it being a pure memoir of you growing up, or?
I didn't set out with that in mind, and so I think I'm the kind of person that pretty much does what they set out to do. So I knew this was just going to be one strand. It's like when I go swimming, if I think I'm going to do 20 lengths, that's what I do.
Stick to it.
So I really knew that I wanted to bring all these things together. Right, but the writing about my mum, right? Yeah. Would I have done more of that? Probably, I think I've got it about right.
I think so, but I think also writing about your mum also sort of underlines the role that women play in amateur dramatics. And I know that you comment on the sort of top heaviness of, I don't want to use this term over-representation, others do use it. I happen to think it's fantastic that there are many more women involved, because hundreds of years blokes played all the women's parts.
Yes, but also it's also why that would be. It's also interesting that would be mooted as a problem. It would never be mooted as a problem if it was an activity that was mostly men. I mean, I would make a stink, and we might make a stink, but it wouldn't therefore be seen as something that was worth denigrating. But as soon as it's something that has the majority women involved, it's seen as lesser and worthy.
And your pictures of those women, including your mother, but other people involved with am-dram, either at your theatre, the Highbury Little Theatre, or elsewhere. The lovely stuff in Marbella. Sorry, I should say.
Julie Marbella. She is a character. She's a force to be reckoned with.
And also some of those women that you spoke to, who deal with licensing and rights, for instance, who are really quite passionate about their particular work, whether it's on the publishing side or whether it's getting the play. You spoke to someone from the South London Theatre, which I suppose you could argue is our local little theatre, and it was wonderful to hear her be quite feisty about the
and then I discovered I was chatting to Angela Barnes, the comedian, recently, and she'd read a copy and she went, "You talked to South London Theatre, that was my theatre." We're kind of back to the code. She went, "That was the theatre I started off in." I went, "Well, you should have told me." It's, once people know you're doing something like this, they'll come out and reveal themselves as am-drammers. I'd love to have known that Angela was involved in that group beforehand, and would have kind of tied together some nice strands. But
there's some good things. You quote some statistics. That Nick Hearn published 60 books, 60 plays in 2018, and of those 2/3 were by women. So also it's not just the performing, it's not just the putting on of the shows, but there's also the writing and the directing that women are coming through with. And I think great, we've got 1,000 years before we've done as much as the blokes did, so plenty to be going with.
This is really interesting. This industry that also can you tell a little bit about the women that are writing these plays and whether they cross over into professional productions as well? They are.
I mean, I talked to two playwrights, and I know from other friends who are playwrights that amateur theatre is a financial string to their bow. Because if you're for instance, I talked to April De Angelis, and she's a celebrated playwright. Her work's just been on at the National. She's on in the West End, but so she has a very high public profile, and you would imagine that. Because of that, there was no insecurity about work, or no doubting that you've arrived and achieved as a writer. But still, having her work produced and performed in amateur theatre means that she can have 6 productions a year going on that all bring her a not massive income, but an income. So it keeps her name alive and going on in theatre, albeit amateur, around the country all the time. And for her and for other writers I've spoken to, that's a really important thing. The amateur strand is an important income strand. I mean, it's just kind of one of the, with theatre having closed down, it's just it's another thing that's been lost. That kind of strand of income for writers and for other companies too. I wrote a piece at the beginning of the week talking about, professional theatre obviously has to be at the forefront because those people are losing their incomes. And somebody rightly took me up on the fact that actually their company makes sets for numerous amateur companies around the country, and they were losing in COVID because of that their business served the amateur community. So it's not just professional theatres who are losing; it's other other businesses and associations.
Costume departments.
Yeah.
I mean, at amateur level, they hire out a lot of their costume. Their expertise goes elsewhere. So yes, again.
Yeah.
Imagine.
But it was also, you quite rightly so talk about creativity and not seeing it through a kind of monetary term, and how the playwrights also need the all writers need support, and they need to be validated, and I think that's what happens also with the amateur network of production of their plays, is that they feel in touch, that the more people recognise that it's worth putting on the play, their words are heard, and that must be extremely gratifying.
And I talked to I was chatting to David Eldridge, and I know he goes to see amateur. I mean, not all of them, obviously, because that would you could be touring the country your whole life, but he'll go and see stuff where he can, because there's a kind of a sense of joy going to see something in an amateur production, because it's been taken on for different reasons, and it will have been produced in a different way, and just seeing your work brought to life again in a new time is always invigorating. So I think it's the amateur strand for playwrights is much appreciated.
Also, I'm looking at Willa over there, from a performer's point of view, you always love to go to the theatre, always love to watch amateur as well as professional. You always come back fired up by other people's performances.
I mean, there's no doubt. I have I've seen it. I go to the theatre. I used to go to the theatre a lot, professional and amateur. There's no doubt I have seen some terrible amateur productions, but I've also seen some terrible professional productions.
And, as you point out, you have to walk out halfway if you have to.
And I think there's this assumption that the amateur theatre has got to be absolutely amazing, otherwise I'm going to slate it. We come with a whole different set of preconceptions and expectations when we go and see amateur theatre, and I think of the amount of, I've just seen some really truly dreadful professional stuff, but I still keep going. Every time I'll still keep going back, and I think people will go and see one amateur production, they don't like it, so that's it, I'm done with amateur theatre, whereas they'll give professional theatre much more of a go and expect it to be much more wide-ranging, and it just isn't often.
And then the audiences, you talk of the sort of audiences that are at amateur productions, who will actually be talking to one another more and saying, well, how comes you're here, and there's that there is just something so potent about being part of the production, even if it's not your turn to be on stage, even if you're just doing the old front of house. Once you're in the audience and the curtain goes up for an amateur production, your heart's in your mouth.
Totally invested.
You're sick with worry. You have as much stage fright as you would if you were up there. You're as nervous as you would be in the green room waiting to go on, and you just, there you are, just sat in the middle of the audience. What do you say? You're either in the audience or in the play, but if you're part of the am-dram movement, you're sort of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, you are. And I think also that there's a kind of different, if you go and see a professional production, I would sit in the audience and not have, I probably wouldn't be very rude about it, but I would have no qualms about saying I didn't like that person playing it, and not expect their mum and dad or sister to be, or their neighbour to be sat next to me and say, that's my brother, sister, sibling you're talking about. But I think in amateur theatre there's that happens at a much kind of lower mumble. People will go, I don't know what I thought about. Did you see that guy? That's my postman at your distance. Do you mind? He's he's doing his best up there or whatever. And so I think all that kind of mumbling goes on at a much lower level.
Well, you even got mistaken for an artist, didn't you?
Yes,
in the foyer.
Yeah.
It was in the foyer of the
foyer,
and the person.
Yeah.
So
they just assumed, because I think I was just.
There was an exhibition on, wasn't there?
And I was waiting for somebody idly wasting my time looking at. I mean, why the artist would have been idly wasting the time looking at their own art?
Maybe they do that.
I didn't delve into that, but they assumed I was the artist, and when they found out I wasn't, was quite rude. Were quite rude about it.
Yes, because they have the freedom to say it.
Yeah.
But that's going on.
Yeah.
Well, it's true enough though as well. I mean, certainly once you've done amateur, it's a bit like working in a restaurant or cafe. Once you've done that, you're always slightly watching to see what happens at the pass, or how the the dockets are fulfilled, and what the waitress is doing while she's down the back there, because you know what it's like.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same, professional or amateur. You can sit at a theatre, you can either choose to be entertained and not think about it at all, or you can just watch that little bit of movement in the far left-hand side and wonder why somebody hasn't sorted that out.
There's a gap here. Is something meant to be happening, or somebody losing their lines, or
a voice in the
stuff.
distance
Yes.
that you shouldn't really actually be able to hear.
Yeah.
Please, thank you.
Yeah.
Because the structure of the book is like I see it as a sort of body of you following a body of a play being kind of put together from and I thought that was a really great way of sort of stitching everything together. So can you talk us about how you sort of approached the structure of how you got to that decision that you were going to follow the play from the beginning to the end, and that was almost going to be...
Well, to be honest, it was just a simple, like, okay, if I'm gonna talk about amateur theatre, I need to do that, and I need to follow a production, because that will give me a really nice narrative arc to the book, beginning, middle, end, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So it was a little gift that presented itself to me, so I took it.
And then you
Nothing really more complex than that.
Right.
So.
I don't know.
No
Maybe
spoilers.
I overcomplicated.
No
No spoilers.
But it is quite nerve-wracking.
It is. You do actually start to feel these sort of butterflies on behalf of this play that you're watching. And wonderful thing about an actor does not turn up for a very long. I don't want to give it away, but you know. And I thought that was really interesting how they could rehearse a play without having. Can I say it? I don't know if I
don't know.
Can I give it away? Anyway, but we find out what happens to the play and then beyond, and it's but I thought it was really interesting how invested you suddenly were and how you found your kind of yourself coming out.
Yeah, that was. I mean, the kind of narrative arc bit was intended, but actually, my personal emotional journey was a surprise to me. Because actually at one point I was going to have some photos in the middle, because I got some terrible photos. The one thing about amateur theatre is that the state of photography in the 70s and 80s was really hilarious, and I wanted to put loads in the middle, and that was my plan up until about the point when I started to really care about this production, because I suddenly thought, actually, I don't just want to. Because it would have been funny, I could have written some funny captions, I could have pointed at how stupid they all looked. And I thought, I don't want that to be the overriding message of my book, is let's point and laugh. Let's have that easy laugh. So it was at the point that I started to really get invested. I thought, Jesus, this is not how I planned at all. I thought I would be just cynical all the way through. I thought it was just going to be an exercise in sarcasm, and then it all shifted around for me.
Oh, it's really quite emotional.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did feel, and actually, I feel really conscious that the people who I've represented, who I've talked about, I don't know what they think about the book. I really hope they like it. Because I felt I had a duty of care to them, especially the younger people. Although actually all of them, there's a mix of ages in the cast, but I do feel that I had a duty of care to them, to take what they were doing as seriously as they took it.
Actually, that in itself makes for a pretty good bit of structure, to have to know that you do have that duty of care.
Yeah,
because
which I wouldn't have started out with, though, to be perfectly honest. I thought I was kind of swanning in, going to do my funny thing, ha ha ha.
Jenny from London,
doing her funny thing. But, it didn't turn out like that.
No, although I'm glad to hear that the coffee was still atrocious.
Yes.
Mushroom water.
Yeah. Instant coffee, Sutton Coffee. It's not Sutton Coffee at its finest.
And also, you did make a absolutely fine sacrifice by putting yourself on.
Oh, how could I not?
Yes, so no photographs inside, but terrific
Yeah.
one on the front. But
Yeah.
what are you dressed as?
I have no idea. Do you know, actually, I have no... My
Great.
mum said she thought I was a bird from
Well, I
something.
thought you were a bird.
But I think I've got my Holy Communion shoes on, because I think those were the only kind of posh shoes I had. So it's a bit of a mishmash of a little bird with Holy Communion shoes, which,
Marvellous.
you know, that's my whole that's my whole life.
So are you going to take the book back up to Brum to...
It was definitely supposed to be launched in Brum,
Yeah.
but obviously that hasn't happened. Hopefully we'll be able to do something at paperback time.
Yes.
Because I actually, the day after I finished it, I had to go up and do a talk up there, which was really strange. But I'd like to be back in that very hot room, chatting to people, just to say thank you as much as anything for the generosity with. I mean, everybody, everywhere I went, people were super generous, thrilled that somebody was taking it seriously. You know, I've had.
It's so heartbreaking,
great
isn't it?
people.
The pandemic has prevented you from doing that, them from doing what they do, the whole thing, and it just seems, you know, paperback in the far off future.
Yes, when everything was different and better. We
At
assume.
least a bit more like it was.
Yes, yeah.
But
Yeah.
how do you see the future of this world going? I mean, beyond the pandemic, do you?
Future of amateur theatre.
Yes.
Absolutely thriving, I
Yeah.
would say. I mean, the thing that's, you know, people like my mum aside, who has no tech, who can't access online.
There was a wonderful thing where you bought her the internet and she put it under a table.
Do you know, she really doesn't like the internet when I'm not there as well. She thinks it's kind of sitting lurking in a corner, staring at her. I'm pretty sure she does turn it off when I'm not there, but but that's fine. She doesn't, you know, she's 88. She doesn't need to get involved in all of that stuff. I would be very annoyed if somebody tried to push me into that. So for people like her, I think all of this is a horrible loss. But for other people in amateur theatre, what's really amazed me and impressed me is the way that people have adapted. Because there's no income to be generated for performers, they're able to do stuff online. Obviously, doing plays that are out of copyright or that they wrote themselves, so that there's no implications there. People are able to have, you know, all sorts of things have been going on online. People have stepped up, and they've stepped up really quickly. They're developing their skills. There's lots of new writing happening. You know, people are learning how to film, how to edit, how to work with cameras. You know, I think all of that is great. So I think actually the future is pretty rosy with or without.
The dream of performing is still there.
Oh, I don't think that will ever go. I mean, I think obviously the adrenaline that you get from, you know, and my friend Hilary, who I talked to in the book, was talking about how in theatre adrenaline is shared among everybody. And, you know, it's one of the few areas where it's really shared among everybody, audience, everybody.
Yes.
So that obviously is not.
Just say the word and I can feel it now.
You smell it.
Yeah. I mean, I've slightly got it going on now, so
I can smell
I
it.
might burst into some little thing at some point. I'm really not going to do that. But so that's the only thing that's missing from, you know, doing socially distanced Zoomy kind of things. But I know of other people who've done outdoor performances and rehearsed together, and that has just been a new and interesting way of approaching material, and you know what you're going to choose, why you're going to choose it, and
the imagination out there, the creativity,
still
all of
that's not going to suddenly disappear.
It will just
turn itself into bread making or, you know, some other thing. It's still going to be there.
Yeah,
There's enough sourdough bread
Yeah.
made. They can
sourdough theatre.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's one of those somewhere out there.
North London. We'll leave North London.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Marvellous.
Well, I think that's, yes, we're getting the nod from Willa, but
Okay.
I think it went very quickly. But thank you so much for coming
Absolute
and
pleasure.
sharing.
It's one of my
Great.
favourite bookshops, so thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'll slip you the $5 now.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're going to sign some copies for us, and
Great.
wish you all the luck.
Thank you.
Like a leg
a
or
leg.
finger now, as they say
Yeah.
in the drag trade. And yeah.
Shall we? Well, I was going to say a big round of applause.
Yes, exactly. Woohoo!
Thank you. End of act.
And
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book, what a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. Crystal Palace Hill, that is. But you can order online.